Hello, we're going to do something a little bit different today. This is going to be a brief history of what computers I've played on and what I've owned, all the way up to the 32-bit. I mean, I'm only going to do up to that. I mean, after that was all PCs, and we're not going to go into that. So, what we're going to start off with is the 8-bits and work up to the 16-bit and 32-bits, and maybe do a little bit of history on the game consoles I have, but we're not going to do any emulations on that because I do own them, but I've never tested them, so I don't know if they work. But this is just a little bit of computing history of myself. Enjoy. Yeah, this is a Commodore VIC-20. This is an emulator called Vice VIC-20 rather. There's a few Commodore emulators that come with Vice. This is one of them. Also including is a Commodore 64 emulator. Yeah, the Commodore 64, Commodore VIC-20 rather, was one of the first computers I ever used. My mate had one. I think it came out in about 1980, 1981, I presume. I think. Well, I think there's a couple of games that I remember on this first playing. That was one called Blitz and Golf, a Space Invader type game where you had a cartridge, big cartridge that goes back in the back of the Commodore VIC-20. I remember. Right. This is the ZX Spectrum, 48K. This was, I think it was one of the second computers I played on, which my other mate had. This was like the first like proper 8-bit computer I played. I know the Commodore VIC-20 was, but you know, this one was competing against the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad CPC. But this one originally, it came out first. Came out in 1982. Sinclair Research Limited. That's what I remember about the Spectrum. I'd never ever used the newer ones after that. But yeah, played some classic games on this. I think one of my first games on this computer was what was it called? River Rescue. Just basically go down a river, rescue people and shooting at things. This emulator is called Spectaculator. It's a very good emulator, and I would recommend it if you haven't already. Right, this one's now the Amstrad CPC. This is the first ever computer I owned. I've actually owned 3 of these computers in my time. First one broke, but I've actually owned 4 because I've got one of these at home now I ever use. But this was my first computer I owned originally, and the emulator we're using, we got 2 on this one, but this one's called Win8 2.0 Alpha 18, and I've got to say this is a very good emulator. Right, this is CPCE 1.90. This is a good emulator, Amstrad CPC. This one's good as a backup because sometimes Win8 has problems with some of my games, my images, so this one is pretty good for a backup. Right, this is the second computer I owned. It's a Commodore 64. I owned this in the early 90s when I've had like 2 of the Amstrads at the time, and they both developed problems, so I was going to get a new computer. Originally I wanted the new Amstrad CPC Plus, but I ended up buying the Commodore 64 instead. I think it was a wise choice I made. My mate had one. I really liked playing on the Commodore 64. So this emulator is called CCS 64 version 3.9. This is a really good emulator. I would recommend it. This one's Vice Commodore 64, from the Vice package, where It comes with a few emulators. I won't go through them all, but this is a good emulator. Very good. I would recommend it. Right, this is my next computer I owned. This is the first 16-bit computer I owned. That's the Commodore Amiga 500, and the reason why I got an Amiga 500, well, it was second hand when I first bought my first one, was a game called Formula 1 Grand Prix. In that, when I first played that for the first time, that is the reason why I had to get a Commodore Amiga. And I thought, wow, this is what 16 gaming's about. And the emulator we're using is WinUAE. This is quite a complicated emulator because you've got to set it all up. You've got to set the ROM, put ROMs in, kickstart ROMs, and basically fiddle about with the settings to make your Amiga, make an Amiga work the way you want it. You can configure it up to be a 500 to the 4000, basically, any way you want. This is the Amiga 500 configuration. Right, this is the Amiga 1200 configuration, which I also had after the 500. This was the first 32-bit computer I owned before I owned any PC. And I say, back in the day, I really enjoyed the A1200. It was a lot faster than the 500, but unfortunately a lot of my A500 games did not work on my Amiga 1200. This is also running the WinUAE. There is another emulation called WinFellow or something like that. It ain't no way as good as WinUAE. I think WinUAE is one of the best Amiga emulators out there, but unfortunately when you come down to recording, Fraps is only good with 8-bit emulators. I don't know, it might work with some 16-bit, but I know this program Fraps, which is a capture software, captures when you're playing games, does not work with does not work with the Amiga or arcade emulation or anything higher than 16-bit, I don't think. What I use is Bandicam, which is a very good piece of software for recording, capturing, you know. But Bandicam you do have to pay, where Fraps is free, but it is worth paying. I think it's something silly like a tenner or something, 15 quid. It is worth it. Or check the internet, see if you can get hold of it, because I would, because it is a good piece of software, Bandicam. Okay, right, that was the computer side. Now we're going to get onto the console side, which I wasn't a big fan of consoles. I had a couple, and the first console that I had was the PlayStation 2. Okay, it was good. I actually have owned two of these. One when I was in this country, and I emigrated to America. I also owned one over there. So I had one in this country, one in that country. So next console I owned was the Nintendo Wii. Now this was a weird one, because I also owned two of these. I owned one when I was in the States. Also owned one when I come back here. It was a good console, but once again just got bored with it. Didn't buy any games for it. It was good when you play multiplayers playing games, but I just obviously just got bored of it and sold it. And it comes to the last console I owned was the PlayStation 3. Very good console, I thought, but I've had it for 4 years, and over them 4 years I only bought 5 games. So once again I got bored with that, ended up selling it. So now the Xbox One and PlayStation 4's come out, will I be owning either of them? The answer is straight away no. So this is the end of this computer emulation and console, my brief history of computing. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, please subscribe to my channel if you want to, and goodbye.